Have you ever walked into a candy store and felt like you just stepped into a memory? Not just the smell of chocolate or sugar, but the feeling of being a kid again. The sound of candy scoops hitting the glass jars, and that excitement of picking something you couldn't get anywhere else. Across the US, there are still candy stores that feel like time capsules, places that have been scooping sweets, wrapping nostalgia in wax paper, and creating traditions for generations. Welcome to Pop Culture Passport, your ultimate guide to quirky and cool destinations across the US. I'm your host, Beth Scalacci, aka the Roman Yeti, here to help you dive into the world of theme parks, uncover film and TV locations, and explore quirky museums, roadside attractions, and legendary venues that capture the heart and soul of this unique country. So grab your pop culture passport and let's discover destinations that resonate with your interest, not just with what's trending on social media. Are you ready? Let's roam. Welcome back. Today we're traveling across the country to explore some of America's most iconic candy stores. From one of the oldest candy companies in the country to neighborhood shops preserving decades of candy history to massive candy wonderlands that people literally plan vacations around. Because candy stores aren't just about sugar, they're about our memories, they're about a place, and sometimes they're about finding a tiny piece of your childhood in a glass jar. Now, if you want to understand how candy became part of American culture, you have to go way back. Long before massive chocolate factories, grocery store candy aisles, or even branded candy bars. And one of the best places to do this is Salem, Massachusetts. Now, we all know when you hear Salem, you immediately think witches, history tours, and fall foliage crowds. But tucked right into this historic port city is something much sweeter, the ye old Pepper Candy Company. And I must point out that company is spelled with an IE without a not a Y, which I found fascinating. But I'll go on. So this shop traces its roots back to the early 1800s and is often called the oldest candy company in America. And whether you're here for the history, the novelty, or just the chance to walk into a shop that feels like it hasn't changed in generations, it really does feel like you're stepping into another era. Now, what makes this place so special is that they remind us that candy wasn't always mass produced or even nationally distributed. Candy used to be local, tied to trade routes, port cities, and whatever ingredients people could get their hands on. And Salem was the perfect place for that kind of candy culture to grow. Long before it was known for its witch trials and Halloween tourism, Salem was a major maritime trading hub. Its ships brought in sugars, spices, and other ingredients that made early American confectionery possible. Now, candy wasn't just a treat, it was a sign of global trade, of access, and sometimes even status. And one of the most famous candies connected to ye old pepper is Gibraltar candy, a hard candy with roots tied to sailors and maritime culture. It's simple by modern standards, but that's kind of the point, right? It represents a time when candy wasn't about endless flavors or even novelty shape. It was about preservation and craftsmanship. And when you walk into the store today, you're not just buying candy, you're stepping into a living timeline of how Americans experienced sweets long before convenience stores and checkout lanes full of chocolate bars. Next up, as candy production grew and America industrialized, sweets started shifting from small local confectionaries to larger scale production and wider distribution. But something interesting happened along the way. Even as national candy brands grew, our neighborhood candy shops did not disappear. Instead, many of them became something else. They became the memory keepers, places where generations of families keep coming back for the same treats they grew up with and want to share with their kids. And if you want to see one of the best examples of that evolution, you can head to New York City, specifically the Lower East Side, and walk into a place called Economy Candy. Because Yield Pepper Company shows us how candy started in early American craft and trade culture. Economy candy shows us how candy became part of urban life, immigrant neighborhoods, and cultural identity in one of the busiest cities in the world. And stepping into economy candy today feels a little less like entering a store and more like walking into a living archive of American candy history. Now, the shop opened in 1937 during the Great Depression, when the original owners started selling discounted and surplus candy to help make sweets more affordable for families. And honestly, that origin story still feels baked into the place today. It's not flashy or overly curated, but it has shelves and bins and boxes stacked high. And it's the kind of store when you walk through every aisle because you are convinced you're going to miss something. And location really matters here. Economy Candy sits in Manhattan's Lower East Side, which is a neighborhood shaped by generations of immigrants and small family businesses and dense lived in city culture. So, for decades, the shops like this weren't just about places to buy treats. Like I've said, they're those neighborhood anchors and the place where kids stopped after school. I mean, we all remember, well, some of us of a certain age remember being able to stop for candy on the way home. And families come back year after year for, like, special occasions and holidays, and certain treats just became tied to cultural traditions and celebrations. Now today, economy candy has taken on a slightly different role, and it's a really interesting one. It's become what I like to think of as a nostalgia archive for American candy culture. You can find current candies, but you can also find those retro brands, those discontinued favorites, and those old school novelty candies, and things that you might not have seen since you were a kid going in there with your family, or maybe even things that your parents or grandparents talked about. Um, and I think it's so cool that places like this exist, and especially in a city that reinvents itself constantly. There's something really comforting about economy candy being there to help people, reconnect and celebrate the big and small events in their lives. So while places like economy candy show us how candy became part of dense city neighborhoods and immigrant culture, there's another version of candy culture that's just as important and honestly just as nostalgic. And that's the good old Main Street candy culture. Because for a lot of Americans, especially in suburbs, candy stores weren't tucked into crowded neighborhoods. They were right on Main Street, part of weekend routines, summer vacations, and just small town traditions. And one of the best modern examples of that experience lives in Littleton, New Hampshire, at a place called Chutters. Chutters is famous for one specific reason. It is home to what's considered the longest candy counter in the world, stretching more than 100 feet. But what makes it special isn't just that record. It's like the ritual of going. Like because bulk candy counters they turn buying candy into an experience. You grab your bag, you walk slowly down the counter, you debate flavors, you add just one more scoop or just one more piece, and suddenly you've built something that feels so personal. It's your own personal candy mix. And that ritual is actually pretty deeply rooted in American candy history. Long before prepackaged variety bags and checkout lane impulse buys, candy was something you chose piece by piece. It was social, it was slow, and it was tied to moments, vacations, weekend trips, and special errands into town. Now, cheddar keeps that feeling alive, but it also taps into a very modern kind of nostalgia, and it's a destination nostalgia. People don't just come here for the candy. They want to tap into a piece of the past, a piece of their memory. And that's just where places like Cheddar's have become more than stores. They become part of your travel culture, part of your, personal traditions. And it's the kind of stop you remember later and the kind of stop that you build into, maybe that regular trip to a location. Um And you can remember having those places on vacation that you went, and maybe it was a candy store like this. And it was always that excitement before those days. Now, if places like Chutters represent candy as community ritual, something tied to Main Street, local tradition, and slow personal choice, well, this next evolution of candy culture takes that idea and turns it all the way up. Because at some point, candy didn't just stay local, it got bigger. And in some cases, it became the reason people traveled in the first place. And if you want to see what that looks like at full scale, you just need to head to Cleveland, Ohio to B.A. Sweetie Candy Company because this isn't just a candy store, it's a destination. Places like Sweetie represent a fascinating shift in how we experience food and nostalgia today. Instead of just serving a neighborhood, it serves travelers, people willing to drive hours just to walk through aisles of retro candy, novelty treats, and sweets they haven't seen in decades. And in a lot of ways, Sweetie shows us what happens when nostalgia and experience collide. When candy stops being just something you buy and starts becoming something you plan a trip around. The Cleveland location is massive. It is in a warehouse with aisle after aisle of candy, soda, novelty treats. It's almost impossible to take it all in the first pass. And Sweetie carries thousands of products, including an enormous selection of retro and hard to find candies. The kind that disappeared from grocery stores years ago, but never disappeared from our memories, honestly. And Sweeties isn't just selling candy, they have a mini golf course on their location, and there's a soda shop there. Like, this is a full half day, full day experience depending on, how lost you get in the warehouse. And then there's another chapter of American Candy Story that takes things in a completely different direction, and, I can't talk about candy and not talk about this place because at a certain point in our history, candy didn't just reflect communities, it started building them. And nowhere is this more visible than Hershey, Pennsylvania. And, I grew up about 20 minutes from Hershey, Pennsylvania. Spent a lot of time visiting there. I love it there. And this is a place where chocolate didn't just become an industry, it became a foundation for the entire town. It became the economy, the infrastructure, and part of the larger story of manufacturing and branding in the country. Um, and today, that history lives not just in the factories, but in an entire visitor experience built around chocolate, and that is Hershey's Chocolate World. Um, Hershey is one of the few places in the US where you can very clearly see how food, and in this case, candy, shaped an entire community. And that story starts with Milton Hershey, who believed that chocolate could be made affordable for everyday Americans and not a luxury product. And when he built this chocolate factory in central Pennsylvania in the early 1900s, he didn't just build a production facility, he built a town around it. It had housing, it had schools, it had parks, it had community spaces that, well, became a theme park. And it was part of an industrial vision. It was social experiment and just an early example of how manufacturing shaped entire regions. And over the time, chocolate didn't become Hershey's biggest export. It really became the town's identity. Like, it's everywhere. There's Hershey Kisses on the street lamps. So many things are chocolate themed, attractions, spas, a whole tourism ecosystem have been built around this brand. And that's where Hershey Chocolate World comes in. It's not just a store, it's an experience space. They have a ride, build your own candy bars, exhibits, tasting, um, all built around chocolate production and the legacy of Milton Hershey and the brand. I can't tell you how much this place has changed from when I was a kid. It was just this cute little dark ride you went through, and then some shops, and at one point, then they started a chocolate chip cookie stand. This place is huge now, um, but like, it's again, it's just telling the story of chocolate and Hershey, and the town really is I if you go to Hershey and you check it out, go to the downtown area, go to where the factory used to be. It's just a really cool little town, little city, um, and I if you're gonna be there, I I would love for you to check out more than the parks. Um, but what I just love about all these candy stores is that they remind us that candy has really never been only about sugar. It's been about a celebration, a tradition, travel, memory, and sometimes a really specific moment in time that somehow you can still think about years later. And candy tells us surprisingly a big story about how Americans live, how we travel, and how we remember. And honestly, I think that's why candy stores still matter. That even in a world where you can order everything online, like if you can go in and have that sensory experience, it's worth it. Um, Now I know there are so many candy stores that I researched and I did not cover in this episode, and I know that you have a favorite one, and I want to hear about it. Please let me know. Click the send us a text link in the show notes. Use the contact form on the Roman Yeti website. Message me on social media. If you get my newsletter, just hit reply and let me know. Um, I've already been talking to some people and they're like, "Well, what about this one? What ab" and I was like, "I know, I don't want I I hate missing some, but I did." So share with me your favorite, please, so I can add them to my travel list and, maybe I'll add them onto the blog post too. So, with that, we add another stamp to our pop culture passport. I hope that this episode inspires you to get out and explore all that is quirky and cool, even in your own backyard. Follow, download, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Tell a friend, leave a review if you like what we're doing. It really does help the show to grow and get in front of more people. You can also follow me on Instagram or Facebook. Just search for The Roaming Yeti. Keep roaming and finding your fun.